It may be an oversimplification, but I'm a preacher, and what else are preachers for? I think you can fairly accurately sum up life in this very simple statement, that if you are sad, it is because you are thinking about the past. If you are worried, it's because you're thinking about the future. The only time and place where you can be happy is in the present moment, right where you are. Depression is always in the past. And depression is just anger without enthusiasm. Anxiety, worry, is about anticipation of the future. All happiness is found in the present moment. The hand-wringing of conservative pundits about an alleged war on Christmas can be found only in the kind of sadness and anger they feel about having lost something from their personal past. Christmas isn't what it used to be. It's changed in many ways. 15 years ago, it would have been common for me to receive 200 or 300 Christmas cards from family members and school friends and church members. Now, if anyone gets more than a card from their insurance agent or the charities that you contribute to, it's an anomaly. The advent of the internet leaves most of us not even knowing the physical address of where many of our friends or family members live. We just send them an email and try to find a postage stamp in your houses, like a Where's Waldo puzzle. But Christmas has changed in substantive ways. The world has become more polarized. We're more distant than we used to be. We're less connected than we used to be. Businesses don't spend the money they used to spend on either Christmas parties or Christmas bonuses. Neighbors don't know each other, and they don't want to. They're too suspicious, or their neighbor had some political sign in their front yard that makes you not want to have an open house for the neighborhood where you would have to let them past your front door. And our world is more diverse. And for most of us, that's a good thing. Ethnic, racial, religious, national diversity makes the world more interesting. And it certainly gives us better choices in restaurants, doesn't it? But it also means that the dominant culture has to show some sensitivity in making room for our new neighbors. Most of what the Sarah Palins, Rush Limbaughs, and Bill O'Reillys are really bemoaning is the loss of an almost entirely unchallenged, very white and very Christian dominant culture. They are grieving the loss of a past in which they indulge themselves in that same fantasy that was recently articulated by Duck Dynasty star Phil Robertson, when black people were happy about being sharecroppers and tenant farmers, and gay people either didn't exist or we didn't have to pretend to be nice to them. As comedian Stephen Colbert said, of course blacks were happy back then. They had their own water fountains. Nostalgia is often not a longing for the literal past, but it's a longing for an imagined, a sanitized, a cleaned up memory of the past. Like watching an episode of Andy of Mayberry set in a small town in North Carolina. North Carolina, a state that is at least 25% black, and yet Mayberry doesn't have a single black person in it. Not one, not in years of episodes. And even the alcoholics, hilarious. The dominant class in any country or any century can make themselves blissfully ignorant of those who are oppressed. I would make the claim that I personally know more about the lives of the rural poor in Nicaragua than do 2/3 of the Nicaraguans who live in the nation's capital city of Managua. They don't know where their produce comes from. They don't know how people are living in the jungles just 30 miles out of town, and they don't want to know. The progress we have made in cultural diversity has forced America's dominant culture to open their eyes and recognize that even though Roman Catholics and conservative Protestants still make up the majority of the religious landscape in America, they can no longer just push the rest of us out to the margins, either to a coloreds-only restroom or to go stay in a barn out back and have your illegitimate baby surrounded by cows and sheep like the other livestock. The anxiety being felt by the traditionalists is that the future will find them even more unempowered than they are now. They're depressed and angry about what they've lost, and they're worried about what their future is going to be. Several states are now doing everything they can to either block the poor, blacks, and Latinos from voting at all, or they are gerrymandering their inner-city voting blocks into singular places where you have almost all of your minority votes coming out of one area. These are fear-based, desperate measures that are essentially admissions of the fact that the world is changing, and is changing so much and so fast that they might win in one more election cycle or maybe two, but their days are numbered. People used to complain about how Christmas had been commercialized. Sarah Palin, however, thinks that commercialization is one of the best parts of Christmas. Traditional Christmas is doing lots of shopping and buying lots of stuff. Retail businesses no doubt agree with Sarah Palin, and I have no particular beef with commercialization, in part because, and I'm suspicious of a lot of the excesses of the consumerism and capitalism that has run amok, but I recognize that commerce is at the root of all productivity, and it is the engine of our economy. If no one bought farmers' products, if no one bought the products of seamstresses and on down the line of the marketplace, then there would be no economy, and poverty would be for everybody. I want our economy to thrive. I just don't want all the profits to go into the hands of the 1%. Somehow, the system is rigged so that the dominant culture becomes more dominant with every passing decade. The real war on Christmas, then, is not, in any honest biblical sense, the removal of the manger scene from the front lawn of the courthouse, or the subtle changes in greetings from the cash register at Walmart from Merry Christmas to Happy Holidays. The real war on Christmas is the adamant fight of the rich and the powerful to remain in an unchallenged white Christian dominant culture. We do not read the gospel accounts of the birth of Jesus in this church as if they were historical. We understand that the stories told by Matthew and Luke are not literal accounts of what happened. Rather, they are, at their root, sermons. I mean, really, the New Testament is a compilation of late first century sermons. They're religious messages used to tell a perspective on a spiritual worldview. And so the birth narratives in Matthew and Luke are theological introductions to their gospels. We've grown up with manger scenes that try to combine Matthew's and Luke's stories, but they're two distinctly different stories. Matthew tells us that the Holy Family lived in Bethlehem, where Jesus was born in their house. They only fled Bethlehem out of fear of Herod after they had been visited by some Babylonian astrologers who were apparently the only people who noticed the bizarre behavior of one star that moved against the normal movement of the rest of the sky and actually came to stop over just one house. You know, you've seen stars do that. Luke's story is equally fanciful, saying that everyone in the Roman Empire had to go to the city of their heritage to be registered in a census. If that had actually happened, that would have been more disruptive than having stars erratically moving around against the background of the stars. If you try to take these narratives literally, they quickly start to look pretty stupid. If, however, you read them the way that Matthew and Luke meant them to be read, they can be very powerful. In completely different ways, both Christmas stories introduce Jesus as being someone who's going to turn the established order of the world upside down. The good news of his birth is not announced to the ruling class. It is not announced to the wealthy. The angels didn't go to the mall, and the Magi were not giving interviews on Fox News. In very different ways, both Matthew and Luke interpret the birth of Jesus in images that are defiant of the dominant culture. The song Mary sang in Luke is, the rich are going to be sent empty away, the powerful are going to be cast down, the poor are going to be lifted up. It reminds me of the image that we've seen in the news several times recently of when Nelson Mandela was released after 27 years in prison. And the South African government had not allowed him to even be photographed in prison for 27 years. Any image that we had seen of him prior was of him as a young attorney before he spent 27 years in hard labor. But he spent 27 years, 18 of which was on Robben Island, where he slept on a floor. There was not a bed or a pillow. He didn't have a toilet. He had to use a bucket in the corner of his cell for 18 years. He was allowed to have a visitor once a year for 30 minutes. He was allowed to write one letter every 6 months, 27 years. And he walked out of prison and he raised one black fist over his head and said, "Power." I don't read the Christmas story as a record of history, of something that happened long, long ago, something that I could never see, something I could never recover, something I could never participate in. I don't see it as a matter of anticipating the eschatological return of Christ, which certainly the Roman Catholic Church meant for the Advent season to be, was lighting those candles, getting ready for Jesus to come back. I read it in the here and now, in this moment, as a source of joy, as a defiant fist raised in a nation where the poor are not only not guaranteed a living wage as a minimum wage, but where they may not even be allowed to vote in the next election, as if voting ever changed very much in an empire where, as Congressman Bernie Sanders recently said, no piece of legislation can ever pass the Congress unless it's been first approved by corporate America. In this present moment, we read this story out here on the edge of town, below the radar of the big steeple churches. Our congressman couldn't care less what we think or what we need or how we're going to vote. We live in a city where the Chamber of Commerce and the Council of Churches shake hands as if they were the best of buddies, both interested in exactly the same thing, the well-being of the wealthy, and that we are just a crazy fringe group. It's okay, because I know that the angels sang to us, and that even the stars line up to affirm that the weak and the powerless, the homeless, the ones who can't afford to either go to a university or a hospital, that Jesus was born for us. Not back then, but now, today, right this minute. So Merry Christmas.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.